Alright, are you ready to go WoW Cool Robot a whole bunch of times, but I can't actually use the Xenoblade X version of the WoW Cool Robot meme that I made because that needs to go in the WoW video, which is like 4 videos from now in my plans? Well, too bad, because that is exactly what we're doing today as I go over the name of every single playable Skell frame in the game. This does include spoilers, and while I could probably talk around them if I wanted to, I would rather go into full spoilers through the epilogue, as that gives a little bit more context that would help me properly explain why I think some things are named the way they are. Said spoilers are going to begin right away, as I'm going to mention something from the brand new epilogue in Definitive Edition right after the end of this sentence. While most people did assume that this was the case, DE directly confirmed that the technology Elma gave to humanity in order to give them a fighting chance against the Ganglion was the Aries, and all human-made Skells were reverse engineered from that. So I think we should actually talk about the Aries Skells first. Two genuinely new pieces of information are the facts that the Aries Prime did not transform into a vehicle mode like all the other Skells, and that while the Prime is one of a kind, Elma's people did make other Aries Skells to aid in their fight against the Ghosts and Ganglion. So the reason Elma was attached to the Prague Aries project wasn't just because she was an accomplished pilot of the Prime, but also because she probably knew her way around other mass-produced Aries units. The Prague in Prague Aries almost certainly stands for progression or progressive, and while I'm not entirely sure exactly why it's called that, my new theory is that it's an experimental prototype for multiple reasons. The first is just power level. The Prime is still by far the most powerful Skell humanity had access to, so they're still trying to chase that dream. The second is materials. Elma's people were the ones to make the armor around the Prime, so maybe humanity just was not able to replicate those on Earth, and this is their first attempt to do so. And then the third is the transformation function. Just based on what little we can see of them, I don't think Elma's people's mass-produced Aries had a vehicle mode. I think, honestly, the vehicle transformation is the first new innovation to Skell technology humanity invented, period. Maybe that's why Lynn's parents were so important. Maybe that is the thing they invented. And the Prague Aries could have been the first attempt to include that in something with a frame design more directly based on the Prime, or something with that level of firepower. Out of universe, the Aries 70 and 90 are named that because the original level cap of the game was 60, and the idea was that, okay, the 70 is your first endgame Skell. It's like you upgrade to level 70. And then the 90s, of course, your equivalent of being level 90, and is your first taste of true top-tier endgame stuff. And honestly, with a 90, you could do basically everything you need to do in the game, even if another kind of level 60 Skell is usually going to be better. In-universe, the 90 is obviously an improvement on the 70, so I'm kind of wondering if, okay, yeah, the 90 is like a limited production, more powerful version that's only given out to truly good Skell pilots like the Avatar or any member of Team Elma and that kind of thing, but also, what if the Aries 70 is either 70% as powerful as the Prime, pre-Chapter 13 buffs, obviously, or 70% as powerful as a mass-produced Aries that Elma's people was able to make, and then the 90 is 90% of whichever one of those is true. I honestly think that makes a lot of sense because I don't think character levels are a diegetic in-universe thing in any Xenoblade game, especially X. As for etymology, Aries of course comes from the name of the Greek war god, and I'm assuming that Aries is basically its localized name once Elma brought it to Earth, and that her people originally named it after one of their own culture's war gods. The funny thing is, we don't actually know what its original name was, even though Void, the guy who created it, is the antagonist of the epilogue because he just calls it the Aries in tune with what everyone else is saying, probably because no one would understand him if he said the completely incomprehensible original name he came up with. Either that, or Void's original name for it was Aries, which is entirely possible if my conspiracy theory about the Samarians being a hyper-advanced race of humans from a different Earth out there in the multiverse is true. The name of every Skell frame directly purchasable with money and not crafted follows the exact same formula, so I'm going to break down parts of that in order instead of going through each specific type of Skell frame first. Every single name starts with 2 letters, then a 4-digit number, then a space, then the name of the frame, then a second space, and then the letters ST. We're going to start with the ST first because that very, very clearly stands for standard type. Because, well, these are the official public release versions of these Skell frames that any blade with a Skell license is capable of purchasing from the regular shop terminal in Armory Alley. Why am I so certain of this, though? Well, the only Skell frame in the game that follows this formula but does not end with ST is the unique level 15 version of the formula Skell that you can only use during a girl's wings to do the final tests on the flight module. And it's pretty clear that this is not one that was just created for this mission. This is something Lynn had been using to test the module for a decent period of time beforehand. It might even be the exact same Skell that Doug crashes at the beginning of the game, repaired and repainted. Anyway, that frame name instead ends with the letters XT, which does not stand for Xenoblade type, but if you know anything about how US military model numbers work, you already know that it stands for experimental, and yeah, this is probably an experimental prototype Skell that was designed specifically to aid in flight module tests. Keep in mind, a girl's wings requires you to be level 33 to accept the affinity mission, and yet you're given a level 15 Skell frame in not just straight up a stock level 30 formula, or even a level 20 version like the default Skell you get. Well, lower leveled Skells have lower defense stats, which means they're using lighter armor. And it is explicitly confirmed that the human-made Skell flight module does still rely on traditional propulsion and not anti-gravity or stuff like that, so Lynn's doing her flight tests on a more lightly armored prototype that's never intended to see direct combat because it's lighter, it is easier to get into the air, and once they can get something that's light but still uses the same profile of a regular formula in the air, they can learn how to tweak things and scale it up to a heavier actual combat model. That's all well and good, but ultimately pretty simple because there are only two options for what those letters even are in the first place. So let's massively up the complexity by talking about the myriad forms the 4-digit number takes. That being said, it's actually really simple if you know the trick. Starting with the latter two numbers at the 4, they're literally just the level requirement for the Skell frame. Not only do the numbers of all the level 30 frames in the shop end with 30 and the level 51s end with 50, but the previously mentioned level 15 formula is 0115, and the two free level 20 Skells, the first from getting the Skell license and the second from completing Weasel's first affinity mission, end in 20. In-universe, of course, these are just an indicator of performance, where a higher number means a further iteration of the design that has higher specs. And say, a blade just starting out in their 0 to 20 urban is not going to do as well as an equally skilled pilot in a 0 to 30 urban purchased from the shop. The interesting thing about all this is that the level 50 series only comes after you've maxed out the Sakuraba Industries arms manufacturer, which means that specific quote-unquote level 50 iteration of the frame was only developed using Moranium harvested in part by Team Elma after Cross wakes up and starts doing work as a blade. Why is this important? Well, that's where the first two numbers of the 4 come in, because they're actually production order. Yeah, so formula is 01 level, which means the formula was developed first, then Urban, then Verus, then Lailah, Inferno, Mastema, Amdusias, Excavator, and then Hraesvelg. Why do we know this? Well, there are actually several reasons. The first is new in DE, where Liesel's mission straight up confirmed that the Hraesvelg frame was still in development until after the game starts, and it isn't without our help that it's able to get approved by Blade and go into proper production. And lo and behold, Hraesvelg's first two numbers are 09, the highest in the game, and in order to unlock the ability to put Hraesvelg into mass production, you need to have gotten the Skell license, and as soon as you've gotten the Skell license, you can already buy the level 30 versions of the frames that start with 01 through 07, so there you go. They had already been in mass production well before then. What about the 0800 Skell though? Well, that is specifically set aside for construction work Skells, believe it or not. These are from Affinity Mission Reward Blueprint, so they're craftable and not purchasable, but either way, from Bose's mission, you can get the US 0830 Dozer, and from Alexa, you can get the US 0850 and US 0860 excavators. We can actually see the Dozer in use not only around the city, but just straight up in the cutscene when we first get to NLA, So that means that the Aries and the Hraesvelg are the only frame types that actually were completed after the beginning of the game. Is it possible that the Dozer was retrofitted from other combat-based Skells in order to help fix the city and build it up after crashing on Mira? Yes, but it's distinctly possible that every engineer on the White Whale had their hands full making sure the ship was running during the 2 years it took to get there, so it's very possible that all of the first 8 frame types were made on Earth, and every other ARC ship was using some combination of those on their attempted escape. This is somewhat backed up by the fact that, yep, there sure are some urbans and formulas in the opening cutscenes long before anyone got to Mira, but who knows when everything else was made. The other confirmation that this is how the numbers work is from the Japanese website of the original Wii U version of Xenoblade X, which gave short blurbs for all 7 shop-purchasable Skell frames in that version of the game, and the blurb for the formula said that it's the basic frame that all others were based on. And hey, look at that, the formula is a 0-100 series Skell, plus it's the kind that Lynn was using to test the flight module, and she's been working on that for a very long time, possibly since Earth, and possibly since before some Skell modules later down the numbering were even made, so it makes sense that she'd stick with the original. Might as well knock out the last craftable affinity mission Skell here as well. HB's missions give you the US 0232 Police, and that's more or less what it says on the tin. It's just the Skell version of a police car. I don't really have anything else interesting to say about it, besides the fact that it actually shares a production order number with another type of Skell. The 0200 series in the shop is the Urban, and look at that, the Police is just a recolored level 30 Urban with Verus's overdrive and higher stat. Now, okay, it is the 0232, and it is still level 30, not a 32 frame, so maybe the 3rd digit in the number signifies the level requirement, and the 4th digit is the iteration on that level version of the frame. So this is the 3rd version of the level 30 Urban frame that is named Police because it was used by the non-existent non-Blade NLA police force. That's the other thing about these craftable quote-unquote civilian use Skells. The Dozer, both Excavators, and the Police don't have an ST at the end of their name, so I'm thinking the ST thing is only for military-grade Skells. While in-game, yeah, they do have stats that allow them to function in battle alongside any of the other frames, I don't think Dozer, Excavator, or Police were designed for actual combat. If they were, I'm pretty sure we would have seen some police units fight alongside the regular Urbans and Formulas in either time Blade needed to directly defend NLA from attack. With that though, let's talk about the most important part of these model numbers, which is the actual name of every individual frame. And obviously now that we've established what the production order was, I'm going to go in that order to describe them all. As I mentioned before, the very first is the Formula, which is described on the old blurb as a standard unit based on the light frame. A lightweight two-wheeler that excels in high-speed combat, this basic frame is the basis for all Skells, an affordable entry-level unit. And yeah, this makes the name make a whole lot of sense. It's called the Formula because it set the basic formula for how a Blade model Skell would even work in the first place. Honestly, I think some prototype version of the Formula just straight up was the first transformable mech completed by humanity, period, and the originator of that concept in the first place, since again, I don't think Elma's people had them. Do keep in mind for future names that all of the Skells except Hraesvelg were canonically developed by Sakuraba Industries, a Japanese company. So even though this is the America Xenoblade game, we're not stuck to Americana or other US-based or associated things for explanations for some of these Skell names. Another important thing to mention is that on top of the level 30 and level 50 purchasable versions of the 8 main frames, there's also a craftable version of each that's level 60 instead. And these break the formula I established before, because instead of all the letters and numbers and stuff, it's just the name of the frame and then a second name, and that's it. Given how they are versions on the combat model, but can only be literally made to order from the AM terminal, I think that these are customs of that given frame. Basically, overclocked, more powerful versions of the level 51 that are made to order to your character, or technically whichever party member you decide to give it to. And that's why they have a unique name. They're not ST because they're literally not standard types that you can get rolled out off the shelf, and they're not even experimental types. They are combat-ready units, but they were specifically designed for the specifications of whichever ace pilot you decide to give it to. Of course, I'm also going to explain the name of each level 60 version of every frame. In the Formula's case, it is the Formula 0, which in addition to sounding really cool, it's just kind of a play on words from Formula 1, because Formula 1 is considered, hey, it's the pinnacle of motorsport. You go from Formula 3, then 2, and then 1. So this is the Formula 0. It's the ultimate version of the very first kind of Skell that could turn into a vehicle. And honestly, even though they are two-wheelers, the light Skell transformation modes do kind of resemble a Formula 1 car in form factor, so it just makes sense and is very simple. Next up, we have the 0200 Urban series, which is described as a light frame-based urban development type unit. It has high durability and combat performance, but the reinforced armor reduces maneuverability and operating time. It has excellent operability in vehicle form. And again, the name is just very self-explanatory. It's designed for urban deployment, so it's called the Urban. And a large amount of blades use both Formula and Urban because they're simple, they were the earliest developed, so people have a lot of experience with it. They seem to be some of the easiest to pilot because of their maneuverability, and, well, Urban makes sense. These are the guys who were there to protect the city of New LA, so they'd have experience in training on an urban model. Plus, a lot of ace Skell pilots in Blade now are probably people who had experience fighting the Ghost and Ganglion to try to protect Earth cities back on the planet, so they have another reason to be experienced with the Urban. In fact, the 0220 Urban ST is even the model of Skell that Blades who just received their license are given because of its ease of use and high maneuverability in vehicle mode, as well as the fact that it's an urban Skell, so they can immediately start doing things in NLA with that Skell as soon as they get their hands on it. The level 60 version is the Urban Lincoln, and even though all of the main Skell frames except for Hraesvelg were developed by the Japanese company Sakuraba Industries, it's pretty hard to avoid America references when you have something named Lincoln. Now, do I think this is named after Abraham Lincoln? Probably not, honestly, though a lot of the other level 60 frames have leader-themed names, so it is possible that this is partially named after a US president as a reference to that theme. What I do think, though, is that it's actually named after the longtime ride of US presidents, and that is the Lincoln Motor Company, which, among many other things, provided the presidential limo from 1939 to 1993. Lincoln just straight up is the luxury division of Ford, so it kind of makes sense that, alright, you got the Formula, you got the basic regular car that everyone uses, and then you got the smoother ride, more maneuverable one designed for specifically traveling around the city and maybe protecting VIPs, like a police motorcade would also do perhaps, and the police is a derivative of the Urban. And that's named after the one major American luxury car company that Monolith wouldn't get sued for referencing because it shares a name with the US president, and actually the Lincoln Motor Company was named after Abraham Lincoln, so there you go. In a roundabout way, it was named after him no matter what. Rounding out our light frames, we have the Verus series, which is described as a custom machine that boasts the output of a mid-frame class, despite being based on a light base. It has a strong character, but extremely high performance. It comes standard with a shoulder-mounted G-Buster, which was specially developed during the development of this machine. Now, it's interesting that it's called a custom machine, because it is still regularly purchasable from the shop, but I think I know where this comes from, and it's possible that the level 30 and level 50 versions of the Verus were actually developed after the level 60. We'll get back to that later though, because first, this is the most complicated Skell frame name because it is within a paradox of good and bad localization, because Verus is the only Skell frame name to be changed in localization, as exclusively in Japanese, it is instead known as Wels, W-E-L-S. I know the exact reference here, but it is kind of confusing, so I'm going to just start at the very beginning. You know how I always mention that the ghosts are based on something from Xenosaga called the Gnosis? Well, this goes one step further back because the Gnosis are based on something from Xenogears, a type of creature known as Uirisu in the Japanese version. This term is the closest possible Japanese transliteration to how we think a Latin word was pronounced back in the day. Verus in Latin means true, which goes along with gnosis being the Greek word for knowledge. This word, if written in the modern-day English-Latin alphabet and pronounced like how an English speaker would, is spelled V-E-R-U-S and pronounced Verus, just like the name of the Skell frame outside of Japanese. Alright, but where does Wells come from then? Well, to spare you the long story, Xenogears had a very troubled and rushed localization, and a lot of things were mistranslated purely because the one guy who was still working on it did not have the time to go and check and make sure he used the correct transliteration of the Japanese. On top of that, this one's hard to catch. Not only do you have to realize that uridisu is supposed to be a Latin word, but you also have to realize that it's a word that starts with V and not W, despite the first katakana pairing being something that traditionally makes the W sound as we know it in modern English. As you might guess, the creatures called uridisu in Japanese are in fact called Wells in the English version of Xenogears. Wells is a completely legitimate transliteration of that Japanese name, and if I wanted to turn that into katakana, it would be spelled exactly the same as the Latin word that it was supposed to be referencing. It just was very understandably missed by the one person who was going over all this stuff. Going back to Xenoblade X, because all of the Skell names are written in English in the Japanese version of the game, and they wanted to make the name of this frame a Xenogears reference, instead of just using the modern spelling of the Latin word they were trying to reference, the developers instead went to the English version of Xenogears to try and find what that term was called in the English version of the game. And so they went with Wells instead of Verus. This then led to another game of telephone with the completely different localization team of X, who, instead of just keeping Wells as is, knew that it was a Xenogears reference, and instead went back to the Japanese version of that game to figure out what the original name was actually supposed to be transliterated as, and went with that, which is preserved in every non-Japanese language. So, I'm not even sure if this is good or bad localization. It's a correct localization of a term that Xenogears had mistranslated like 16 years before Xenoblade X came out, but also the Japanese version used the incorrect translation, so doing this change in localization to be more accurate to the Japanese version of Xenogears was inaccurate to the Japanese version of X, and also obfuscated the Xenogears reference to people who were playing the game in English, so I don't know what to make of this. Honestly, the easiest way to fix this would just be for Square to get off their butts and re-release Xenogears with that updated localization, because if that was done, Wells would absolutely be changed to Verus as it should be in the English version of that game, and the reference would be clear for all to see, so we wouldn't need to worry about anything. Although I guess the Japanese version would then need to change Wells to Verus, but I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore. Anyway, the level 60 version of the Verus is the Verus Cain, and you might be thinking, it's Cain because Bible reference in Xenogame, and you would be right, but it is a little bit deeper than that. Verus in and of itself is a Xenogears reference, and the story of Cain and Abel is the most relevant to Gears out of any game in the Xeno series, so it makes sense to call back to another prominent thing in Gears in the name of the level 60 Skell. Why do I think the Cain came before the level 30 and level 50 versions though? Well, the Verus Cain is straight up Elma's personal Skell. Not only does her post-game affinity mission show that she was using one when she first landed on Mira, but some of the supplemental short stories that were again published on the Japanese website for the Wii U version of the game also explicitly say that that is her personal unit. So while she doesn't automatically come with one, because it would be a little silly to just give you a level 60 Skell as soon as you get your license, that is canonically what Elma pilots throughout the entire game. If the Cain is Elma's personal unit, this might explain why the Verus is described as a custom frame, even though you can just regularly buy it from the shop. It's also described as being a light type with the output of a medium type. And you know what's medium? The entire Aries family. So it's possible that Elma helped design a transforming Skell that has the maneuverability of a light type, but the output of a medium type, because that's the closest she could get to the Aries without being in the Aries itself. And the Cain is what resulted from that. That became Elma's personal unit, and then eventually, later on, Nerfed versions, the level 30 and level 50, were made so that mere mortals would be able to pilot a version of the Verus. That all makes sense to me, at least. I don't know if this backs things up or not, but the G-Buster, the signature weapon of the Verus that comes equipped on all of them, is a shoulder-based weapon that costs a lot of fuel and inflicts stagger, and Hecaton Piercer is an Aries Prime art that's associated with a shoulder weapon that also inflicts daggers, so maybe the G-Buster is a weapon Elma helps develop to try and replicate some of the functions of the Prime too. Anyway, moving on to the medium frames, we reach the 0400 Lailah series, described as a custom machine based on a medium frame. Although the machine's weight has increased, its maneuverability has not been compromised due to its high output, and it's based on the concept of light class maneuverability. It comes standard with the shoulder-mounted F rifle, which was specially developed during the development of this machine. Well, I guess we run into a bit of a wrinkle with my previous theory, because the Lailah is not associated with any character in specific, and it's also described as a custom. So it's actually kind of possible that maybe every frame except the Urban and Formula is technically a custom, because those are the only real standard issue ones that Blade uses. Anyway, when spelled this way, Lailah is the Hebrew word for knight, which is the name of an angel in some parts of Jewish mythology, though not directly in the Bible itself. One of her appearances is in the actual text, the Zohar, that the Zohar from the Xeno series is named after, so that's definitely what they were going for here. I'm describing the angel as female here because, well, the Arabic version of the Hebrew word the angel is named after also just straight up became a feminine name, and also the Zohar itself seems to associate the angel with femininity, as well as several other interpretations in other Jewish texts as far as I'm able to tell. The level 60 version is the Lailah Queen, which doesn't seem to have any specific reference in it. The angel Lailah is said to have aided Abraham in attacking the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, so she helped overthrow kings, which makes her a queen? ? Honestly, I think the name is just there to go along with the leader or ruler theme in all the level 60 versions of the Skells, because they're the more powerful and better versions, and also might have been given out to not just ace pilots, but also commanders who would need a more powerful unit in order to properly lead a Skell squad. Elma's frame being the Verus Cane is really cool, and I kind of wish other characters who are canonically team leaders also had canonical level 60 Skell frames that were developed specifically for them, and when we get them from the AM terminal, it's actually the arms manufacturers building a Unit 2 of that custom for us instead of that person. Anyway, though, the 0500 series is the Inferno, described as a custom machine based on the medium frame. Developed as a main machine and deployed in large numbers, it has high durability and well-balanced attack performance at both short and long range. It comes standard with the shoulder-mounted B Gatling, which was specially developed during the development of this machine. I have no idea why this one's described as a custom either, because, spoilers, the two heavy frames we've yet to get to are not described as them at all. So, yeah, there's no real justification for Lailah and Inferno being customs, and there is one for Verus, but they're all described as that, so whatever. The name Inferno is probably just a reference to, like, Inferno, the concept of bad places in the afterlife in a lot of religions being on fire. The level 60 version is called the Inferno Skydon, and this is a really interesting reference because Skydon is the name of a kaiju from the original Ultraman series who debuted in 1967. And Ultraman's a pretty iconic thing. Sakuraba's a Japanese corporation. I would not be surprised if they were able to get away with making some of their product names references to important things from Japanese culture. Another funny thing is that the original kaiju is actually an alien that arrived on Earth in a meteor because, haha, funny, it looks like a dinosaur. But that might describe Elma. Maybe we have to look at parts of the plot of that original Ultraman episode to learn a little bit more about what happened when Elma first arrived on Earth. Although, I don't think they had a giant tokusatsu hero on Xenoblade X's Earth, just a hunch. But hey, originally the blades in Xenoblade 2 were inspired by Ultraman and were supposed to be that tall, so it just keeps going around in circles. Maybe the real Mobius strip was the entire Xeno series itself all along. The 0600 series is the Mastema, described as a multi-legged machine based on the heavy frame. It excels at long-range combat, but its weight makes it less maneuverable. It comes standard with the shoulder-mounted M Sniper, which was specially developed for this machine. It has difficulties in maneuvering in vehicle form. Mastema is another angel reference. This time being from the Book of Jubilees, a text that in the modern day is considered apocryphal by most denominations of both Judaism and Christianity. Mastema is a similar figure to Satan when not considered directly identical, and is also associated with Belial. In some tellings, he's also given control of the 10% of demons who survived the Great Flood, and is given direct permission by God to tempt humanity as a form of testing their faith. The level 60 version of the Skell is the Mastema White Reaper, which is called that despite being black. There's a few things that might be behind this. There's a very obvious potential Gundam Unicorn reference, and we already know Tetsuya Takahashi got Sawano to do the soundtrack for Xenoblade X specifically because of his performance in that series, so people important to Xenoblade X are very aware of Unicorn. But then there's also the fact that it's called the White Reaper, but is colored black, so it might be correlating the name Mastema with the fallen angel depictions of Satan, and also the idea of Reaper maybe going alongside Mastema's sometimes role of helping judge humanity. It could also be a reference to the White Rider of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and probably isn't a reference to the American garage punk band that is every single Google result if you just search White Reaper on its own. The last kind buyable in the original version of the game is the heavy type 0700 Amdusias series. Described as a tracked machine based on a heavy frame. It's designed with an emphasis on melee range, so it excels in close combat and boasts the highest durability and fighting power of all Skells, but it's expensive and difficult to obtain. It comes standard with the shoulder mount equipped with the E-Scythe, which was specially developed for this machine. Amdusias is the name of a demon, a Duke of Hell, from the Lesser Key of Solomon. He's not the only thing from that text to get referenced in Xenoblade X, as the portion of the key that lists a bunch of demons is known as the Ars Goetia, which was used for a member of the Ganglion. Also, Amdusias is the 67th demon listed in the Ars Goetia, and the Amdusias Skells are the 0700 series. The level 60 version is the Amdusias Hades, who is of course named after the Greek god of the dead, this being the only reference to Greek mythology after the Aries itself. The progenitor Skell was also named after someone from there, but hey, there's another one. And as you can see, there's a very big underworld/afterlife theming, especially going on with a lot of these names, which I think is kind of interesting, but I'm not sure exactly why this was chosen in universe. New to Definitive Edition, but based on cut content from the original game, is the 4th light frame, the 0900 Hraesvelg series. This Skell is designed around a novel frame technology, its exclusive weapons, and then later, its ability to transform into a completely unique fighter jet-shaped, high-speed flight mode. The name is another mythological reference, this one going to the Norse, as Hraesvelg is the name of the giant eagle from Norse mythology, whose wing flaps make the winds of the world. The level 60 version is the Hraesvelg Lord, and yep, again, this goes along with the whole ruler theme for the level 60 Skells, but I do think it is also a shout out to Fire Emblem, as of course Edelgard von Hraesvelg is the name of one of the main characters in Fire Emblem Three Houses. Protagonists in that series are often referred to as lords because they're usually nobility and frequently have access to an exclusive class of the same name, and even the Hraesvelg Robus, the boss of Liesel's second Affinity mission, has a very similar color scheme to her outfits. At last, we need to talk about the first part of all the standardized Skell names, and discuss the 2 letters at the beginning. At first, you might think that some Skells starting with US, some starting with AS, and some starting with XS is just some sort of additional indicator as to which is light, medium, or heavy, but that is in fact not the case. While yes, both the heavy Mastema and Amdusias start with XS, Dozer and Excavator are also considered heavy Skells, and those start with US. In fact, the only other US besides Dozer and Excavator is the light Urban and Police. Every other frame, Formula Verus, Lailah, and Inferno, is AS, so this does not correlate to weight in any way. The other thing to bring up is that there is a localization difference. These first 2 letters are different in Japanese and international versions of the game, but not to the degree you would think. The US Skells are UD in Japanese, the AS are AD, and the XS are XD. And, well, that makes it really obvious what the S stands for. It just stands for Skell, because Skells are called dolls in the Japanese version, and that's the only language of the game that uses D instead of S. That means that all of these acronyms must just be some noun or adjective, and then Skell. And another piece of supporting evidence for this is the fact that in the French version specifically, these two letters are changed around, so it's SU, SA, and SX, which is accurate to French grammar for something like that, even though other similar languages like Spanish or Italian didn't make that change. The other detail is the one legitimate localization error in any Skell name, and that comes with the Hraesvelg, which you might notice I completely avoided mentioning so far. That's because, new to DE, it brings a unique two-letter prefix to its name. The Hraesvelg models are the GD0900 Hraesvelg series. And, why they're D and no S? Well, it's because DE has a different localization team, and they didn't catch the reason for the changes with all the other ones, so they forgot to change that. It is GD in Japanese, and just wasn't changed. Now, when it comes to explaining these sets of two letters, I am going to start with GD, just because it's really, really simple and doesn't require any thinking. You might think it's confusing because, oh, okay, they added this new Hraesvelg stuff after the fact, but the important thing is, Hraesvelg is the only type of Skell frame not produced by Sakuraba Industries. It is instead made by Granada Galactic Group, a completely different company. So GD almost certainly just stands for Granada Doll, because honestly I can't think of any letter that starts with G that accurately references the new flight mode. Now, yes, spiritually the G stands for Gundam, but they couldn't really say that in a Xenoblade game, so clearly in universe it stands for Granada. Moving on to the second least represented set of letters, we have US, which yes, does not stand for United States for once, even though this is the America Xenoblade. I once thought that this stood for Urban Skell, but that probably isn't the case, because, well, yes, the Urban is the main frame that uses that. It is also used for Dozer and Excavator, which are mainly used as construction equipment and don't have anything to do with combat at all, so that's probably a misnomer because you can have construction equipment for places that are not urban centers. My guess is that it actually stands for Utility Skell, and this does make sense. The Dozer and Excavator are specifically utility machines. It is the Urban that was derived into the police car version of the Skell, and again, based on its description and the fact that its level 60 custom is called the Lincoln, I have a feeling that Urban is the type of frame that might be available to civilians as some sort of luxury car equivalent with no weapons, available for purchase to the wealthier private citizens of NLA. On top of that, the Urban is the only type of frame that's mentioned as having been designed for a specific theater of combat, so that again is an indicator of utility. I'm gonna do AS next and save X for last, just like everyone who got into Xenoblade with the Switch era, except unlike most of those people, I'm not going to lie about it and never actually buy the game. If we never get an X2 because of how badly XDE performed relative to the other Switch Xenoblades, I am never going to forgive people like that. Anyway, almost half of generic Skell frames are AS, so whatever the A stands for must be something pretty generic because it does cover both light and medium, as well as the explicitly souped up Verus, and the allegedly custom Lailah and Inferno. My original conclusion is still my final one. It probably just stands for Attack Skell or Assault Skell, because these are just generically offensive Skells that are not said to have any specific use or really any specific gimmick to them, other than 3 of them having a specific stock weapon type that was developed alongside the frame. And given how those are all aggressive offensive weapons and not anything more designed for, say, suppression or support, I think that does make sense. Lastly, we do have XS, which does not stand for Xenosaga for once. Despite what I said before, I also don't think it stands for experimental. I actually think it stands for extreme. Now, it could also be something like excess or even expensive because of how pricey the heavy frames are and the fact that Amdusias' blurb directly states that it's very costly, but I think it's extreme because they're either extremely specialized or designed for extreme terrain. Mastema is a sniper unit designed for long-range combat, and Amdusias is an absolute tank designed to be the best in melee, while every other frame seems to be a lot more balanced. Additionally, Mastema's vehicle form looks more like a mobile weapons platform than anything, and while it's stated to not be very maneuverable, does look like something that you'd actually want to transform into to get more stability when trying to snipe with its big weapons, even though obviously in-game you can't fight in vehicle mode. On top of that, Amdusias' vehicle form also has treads instead of wheels, so I think heavy Skells might have even been designed so they could function more as traditional tanks in vehicle mode if the need arises. And then also, of course, because they're heavy frames, They're more durable and more resistant to extreme weather or terrain. Honestly, I think if X was made into an anime or something, a lot of the characters who would normally be using a light or medium Skell would swap to using a heavy XS extreme Skell during points in the story or missions that take them to Sylvalem or Kaldros, because it might be possible that one of the other models would get easily immobilized if all the pollen in the air got caught in its joints. And I'm not sure if many light or medium Skells are armored enough to protect the internal mechanisms from the heat of Kaldros' lava. And that is it. I think I'm just going to end the video here without a lot of fanfare because this ended up way longer than I expected, and I have no idea how long it's going to take to edit. I had to cut an entire comedic rant and little sketch about just how every contracted creative who worked on Xenoblade X had worked on some kind of Gundam thing before, so maybe that will make it into another video someday. But until then, I need to start making the Lin video too, and this is Luxon, signing off.